Yes. Walter will join at 10:30. The Q&A session will start then. EVC sir may also join at that time. So this is the time for us to discuss and any things that you wanted to discuss. So if you are, we have collected the questions which we will be posing to Walter in a sequential order. But apart from that, if you have some additional questions, you may use the chat box here. So we'll, if the questions are not repeating, we'll take them if time permits. Okay, please, based on your learning, if you have some questions, please share that in advance. Okay. If there is time, we'll ask some person calling their name to unmute themselves and ask the question. Otherwise, it will be like some confusion will be there. People will start unmuting themselves and asking like. So we wanted to have all this situation in some control. So I hope. Uh, I didn't know how you are all feeling with the lessons, whether they are too much technical. You want, what are the broad suggestions that uh, you can give to us, all the facilitating team? Uh, you can put your suggestions also in the chat box. Okay, so the we have three or four questions in the poll that you'll be soon having on your screens. So when do we start, Shiva?
Sir, we are taking participants, sir, more participants.
Okay. Okay, maybe at 10:15 you can start. In the meantime, please call up all the facilitators, call up your team members, not just facilitators, your thematic team members. If you find they haven't joined yet, please call them up and ask them to join. Okay. So we'll have poll at 10:15. In the meantime, if you have any questions, suggestions, please use the chat box. Thank you.
Sir, it's 10:15. I will start the poll, sir.
Yes, please.
There was 5 minutes time and the poll will end.
Only 8 of the participants have answered the polls. I request more of you to answer. Thirty-one of you have answered the poll, which is approximately 50% of the participants. So I would encourage more of you to answer the poll. Even if you think it's the wrong answer, it's okay. These polls have been drafted to increase engagement. Last 2 minutes. 39 of you have answered the poll, which is approximately 60% of the participants. 1 minute remaining. I would request the other participants to answer as well. Sir, I think we can start discussing the answers for the polls.
Yeah, 20 people did not answer the poll. So I don't know if you are ready for the class and you're not traveling and you're sitting at one place and trying to listen. So uh, so the first question is, so what Walter has said, we thought that discussing some numbers uh, uh, will help us to understand the quantum of impact that can happen if we are switching to natural farming. So that's why instead of not talking vaguely, so what is the rough approximate the impact might cause? So putting that in mind, so it is like, first question is like industrial agriculture. When Walter was talking about industrial agriculture is only, trying to uh, work on top few centimeters of the soil, 10 to 20 centimeters. So for all the crops, water requirement, nutrient requirement. Whereas soil earth sponge can influence the soil depth up to 22 meters is what he told. Okay, so that is 2 meters is approximate soil that can be impacted by soil sponge. The second question is longevity of green cover to 1 to 2 meters. Longevity of green cover is, it helps in all of the three aspects. It builds resilience among the crops, biofertility, and water retention. Okay. So, and third question, it is hydrograph. 85% of the participants gave the correct answer. And fourth one, many people kind of first did not give proper answer. Only 40% of the participants, 20 people gave the correct answer. So when he explained the 100 drops concept, so 12 drops go into streams and only 2 drops end up in dams. So that is a very important ratio that we should be aware of. The huge infrastructure that we created using a lot of money, public money, is only helping us to capture 2% of the rain. And also the life of such huge projects is also in question. When the reservoir is silted, even two drops also won't be stored in those dams. So the answer is A, fourth. And improved soil structure results in how much increase in exposure to nutrients is like when Walter was explaining the voids that create actually expose the mineral surface to 10 to 20 times. Water holding capacity also is increased. Nutrients and water. Okay, so I think if it is time, we'll invite or wait for Walter.
Hello, can you hear me? Please switch me on.
Hello, Walter. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay, and visuals. Can you see me?
We can't see you right now.
Okay, I think it says the camera is switched off at your end.
I'll just ask the technical person to look into
Yes, thank you.
Good morning, Walter.
Good morning. Yes, how are you?
Try to turn off the camera. Yeah.
All set for number 5. Very good.
Yes.
And I was listening into your questions with the polling and what have you, and very pleased that everyone got the hygrograph story so clearly right.
Walter, you can.
Hydrograph was like an important part of module 5, so I think everyone looked into it quite carefully.
I agree. But look, I'm still not getting any visuals because, I mean, okay, hang on, it may change now.
Try to turn on your camera.
Oh, here we are. Yes. Now, can you see me? If I normally get a little picture, I've got the screen behind. Can you see me now?
No, we cannot see you.
Okay. I'm just trying to check. Start video. Now we are right.
Yes.
There we
Yes, yes.
Very good. Right. Good. Yeah, no, look, everything's well. And I hope everyone's been well there. And obviously a bit disturbed about the floods in Pakistan, right? They're, I mean, very much what's on topic today, the whole issue of floods. Correct. And sponge and resilience. Yes. But yeah, let me know when you're ready, and so then we can get going. But no rush.
We are ready, Walter.
Okay. Well, look, would you like me to start?
Hello, Walter.
Yes, hello, greetings, and thank you very much for joining again. This is module number 5 of the Masterclass, looking at natural farming in India, Andhra Pradesh, but right across India. But then how do we use natural farming? What's the messages, the lessons in practically extending natural farming as really a major change in our whole agricultural approach. And as we're going through this 10-module masterclass series, we've looked at natural farming, why it's important, what are the critical target areas that we need to focus on. And in a sense, we went then back into sort of, well, look, how did nature create the biosystem that we, of course, evolved in and depend on? And of course, in module 4, we then focused on the soil carbon sponge. Really, this is the cardinal piece of, in a sense, innovation that nature created 420 million years ago. The sponge drawing down carbon from the air through fungi, through microbes and plants, and depositing organic matter in the soil to make a mixed detritus of mineral and organic matter detritus. And that, in a sense, is a sponge. And that sponge fundamentally changes physical structure of soil. We were illustrating that with our little model of how basically, instead of having a compacted, solid little rock, we actually end up with those mineral particles all glued together in an open matrix. And of course, we can see very clearly the volume of that matrix is enormously enhanced. And it's in that volume, in the voids, the spaces, the nothing that is now within this matrix, that's where our water holding capacity, our surface area, nutrient availability, our rootability, resilience, and productivity comes from. So natural farming is actually really, really simple, very clever, because it's simply by rearranging those mineral configurations in the soil that the soil now has completely new functionality. And module 5, which is what we're concentrating now, is saying, well, look, how does this new structure in soil, the sponge, give us functionality? And module 5 was all about looking at the actual rehydration of landscapes. You know, how does the sponge generate hydrology in a landscape? And of course, hydrology is critical because obviously all of life needs water. Water is an essential component of biochemistry, but also the whole physics and biology of ecosystems. Water is the key medium for life and for biochemistry. Water is also the key medium for 95% of the heat dynamics on the planet. It governs the planet's climate. And so it's the hydrology that was enabled through the sponge that gave us the stable climate in which we evolved and on which biosystems depend. So what we were then looking at is not just the sponge, but the actual functionality that the sponge gave us through hydrology. Module 6, which we'll follow on with, of course, after this, is looking at the same issue, the role of the sponge in enabling biofertility to happen. Module 7 will look at the sponge, again, same sort of thing, in enabling actually the nutritional integrity of the plants and the food we eat, and through that, our preventative health. So in a sense, our whole physiological health, again, anchors back to the sponge. So basically, modules 5, 6, and 7 were all about these critical, empowering functionalities enabled through the sponge. And the powerful message is that, see, we, as in nature, we can regenerate the sponge. We have, as we saw in module 4, the skills, the agency through natural farming to rebuild soil carbon, to rebuild the sponge. And by rebuilding that sponge practically, locally, through natural farming, we can restore hydrology, we can restore biofertility, we can ensure nutritional integrity, preventative health. And while we haven't concentrated on it in this masterclass, we can also actually restore and protect and ensure a safe climate, because through the sponge we can actually manage the hydrology, which we've already said is 95% of the heat dynamics of the planet. But today, basically, we wanted to look at, obviously, the hydrology issue. We've, I think, had a fairly good perspective on the physical structure, the microphysics of how having the sponge allows us to infiltrate rain, retain rain, and enable that water in the soil to be made available for the longevity of plant growth. And that came through in your discussion before this masterclass opened, the quizzes and what have you, when the question was that, yes, by rebuilding the sponge, we are able to restore structured soil to 2 meters, 3 meters depth. We're able to have roots proliferating down to that level. And so the volume of soil resources that is now actively helping plant growth, biosystem life, is vastly expanded instead of 10, 20 centimeters of surface soils. We are now able to colonize 2-3 meters of soil, and therefore the volume of resources, the productivity, resilience goes up enormously. And then across a landscape level, again, we saw the significance of that sponge, and we could see that through the 100 drops, whereby basically if we have a well-structured soil, every one of the 100 raindrops that may fall will be able to be absorbed, retained, made available for green growth. If we destroy the sponge, then basically, 98% of that rainfall, 98 drops out of 100 will run off in flood erosion flows. And as you're seeing tragically in Pakistan now, again, we've had a monsoonal event, yes, a bit beyond normal, but what's really been tragic, that most of that water is just rapidly running off degraded, concreted surfaces, concreted catchments. And of course, that rapid loss of water is causing erosion, massive physical damage, massive destruction of agricultural productivity, and flooding of 30% of the land area, and loss of perhaps 80% of the livestock. So the damage that the floods can create, water isn't just essential for life, but water is the medium that kills. And in a sense, it's our management of water in the landscape through rebuilding the sponge and the in-soil reservoirs that is so critical now as climate extremes intensify. Nations have to rebuild their hydrology, their capacity to infiltrate, retain, and slowly make that water available. So this is really the big, big message. And again, I think everybody captured it very well, because your responses as far as the hydrograph, that illustrates that functionality at a local catchment level, what happens to 100 raindrop, what happens to every rainfall event when you have a concreted, degraded landscape compared to a healthy, natural farming landscape. And again, it's powerful, and it's just tragic that we're seeing the results of that soil degradation in Pakistan and the massive losses associated with it, simply because the sponge has been degraded, in this case through extensive industrial agriculture, soil carbon oxidation, and collapse of that sponge structure. So, look, that's the critical message for humanity for the future. That was the focus for Module 5, that, look, we control the sponge, and through that we can control and buffer hydrology. On the positive side, if we can do that, then we have enormous agency, because then we can start talking about, okay, if climates are going to become more variable, if droughts are becoming more dangerous and prolific, how do we actually enhance rainfall? How do we harvest more water from the rivers, from the air that flow across all countries continually. And what are the skills that nature's using, and what is it that we can learn to use to also augment, enhance the hydration of our landscapes? But all of that is meaningless unless we have the sponge in which to capture, infiltrate, retain, and make that water available. But then there's, potentials of, harvesting humid air flows up to 5% of the weight of air flowing across all the continents of the planet, including most of the world's deserts, is water. So we have these rivers of water in the air flowing across deserts. And of course, nature uses that and harvests that through its plants, either hygroscopically or through dew structures. And again, we can design agro-ecosystems, natural farming systems that do that as well. And I don't know how much time different people had to go into it, but for example, this innovation that you've shown in Andhra Pradesh, pre-monsoon dry seeding, is really exciting and important in that context, because here we are, once we've got well-established organic soils, organic matter in the soils, we're demonstrating that we can actually rehydrate regions that were formerly arid wastelands, and to rehydrate them before the monsoon. That we can get young, very resilient seedlings germinating before the monsoon, so that when the monsoon rain comes, they are able to capture, infiltrate, and retain that. And these pre-monsoon plants are able to do that through actually breaking down organic matter, generating metabolic water, capturing better water from soil resources that non-mycorrhizal and non-natural farming plants can't get access to, and thereby establish green pioneer plants that help regenerate arid areas pre-monsoon. So these become really powerfully important things. They become critically important in terms of climate, because it's regreening those large areas, 5 billion hectares, 40% of the planet, that we've turned into man-made deserts and wastelands. And it's actually regreening those that's going to be very, very critical in managing the climate. Not just carbon drawdown, but more importantly, reducing the re-radiation of heat from those areas because of the greener, cooler, protective soils. And by reducing that re-radiation, actually turning down the greenhouse effect. And again, this is fundamentally new, innovative, but practical, powerful options that we now have to turn down the greenhouse, not just by reducing CO2 levels in the air, but actually reducing the re-radiation from hot surfaces, because it's that re-radiation that actually drives the greenhouse effect. If we turn that down, we can turn down the greenhouse irrespective of how many greenhouse gases are in the air. The re-radiation, reducing that re-radiation from hot, arid surfaces, is also critical in reducing the high pressure heat domes that form over those bare, hot, dry landscapes. And as we have talked briefly, it's those high pressure heat domes that block the inflow of cool, moist marine air onto the land. High pressure is a blocking effect. Low pressure, moist air can't push out high pressure air. It's the other way. High pressure flows to low pressure. But by creating these high pressure heat domes through our land degradation and heating of soils, we have actually prevented this humid airflow coming in onto the land. And of course, that's been part of the systemic weakening of the Indian monsoon, or monsoons all over the planet. And now we have this question, by natural farming, by regreening large areas, by pre-monsoon dry seeding, can we actually protect soils? Can we keep them cooler? Can we reduce re-radiation, the greenhouse effect, the formation of high pressure heat dome, and in that way help stabilize and create reliable, more regular monsoonal airflows on which our whole future depends. So look, it's a summary of what Module 5 was all about: hydrology, us empowering ourselves through natural farming, through hydrology, through the agency of the sponge. And really, it's one of these key tools that we have as natural farming. And of course, contrasting industrial farming is doing the opposite, because as we learnt in Module 4, it is simply oxidizing carbon from the soil and thereby losing that sponge, losing that hydrological function. Okay, but look, on the strength of that, so we have enough time, I'd like to now go through some of the very good questions you've raised about Module 5. And again, as before, if basically you relay the questions to me, and I'll try and get through as many as I can and basically give you detailed answers. But yes, please, let's start on those questions.
Thank you, Walter, for elucidating the concepts of Module 5 while addressing the present global climate crisis and explaining how PMDS is essential in rehydrating landscape. So the first question is, the soil organic carbon content in India has come down to 0.3% from 1%. How much time will it take for the regeneration of soil organic carbon to 3% in this scenario? What are the efforts needed to achieve an ideal soil organic carbon sponge?
Right, wonderful, and thank you very much, Diksha, for this. It's a very important, critical question, because you're really saying this is, from what we've seen before, this is what humanity depends on for its future. It's fair to say that India's soil, if you go back to India's natural soils, the rainforests and the savanna grasslands, they would have had more than 1% carbon, probably 3 to 5% carbon as equivalent natural systems in those tropics. But the point is, as you said, what's not so matter and what's important isn't that whether it was 3% or 1% or 5%, but the fact that much of India's agricultural landscape is now at 0.3% or less. But while that's pretty serious, and of course we're seeing the consequences of that in the Pakistan to your north, what's really the good news is, and this is where natural farming is so important, the good news is, yes, we can restore that soil carbon level very rapidly. And more importantly, this rapidly, we are fully empowered to do that. It is us through natural farming, and only through natural farming, that we can do that. And it's really a question of now scale. And this is the experience, of course, of all the farmers listening. If we've got a garden, a small area, 10 square meters or 50 square meters of land, clearly we can add organic matter, we can add manure, we can grow green cover crops, we can mulch, and we can rebuild the soil carbon organic content of that soil rapidly, simply by, adding organic matter, reincorporating organic matter. We can bring that, small area of soil back up to 3% carbon in a matter of weeks, simply by adding and reincorporating compost, animal manures, mulches, etc. Now, obviously, we can't do that at a bigger scale, just the simple physical limits of it, but also the supply of organic matter just isn't there. But if we were talking on an acre or a hectare level, then again, natural farming and what Vijay and you have shown in Andhra Pradesh is world leading, because you've said within 2 or 3 years, through multi-species cover crop, mixtures of basically 10, 15, 20 different plants, seed plants, all growing in those fields, pre-monsoon dry seeding. You can actually build that organic matter content simply, as we showed in module 4, through photosynthesis, through massive plant growth, and that plant growth drawing carbon dioxide from the air, turning it into biomass, sugars, biomass, cellulose, lignin, and then 60% or so of that biomass converting into stable soil carbon to rebuild the sponge. So, okay, so at the 1 acre, 1 hectare level, yes, you've demonstrated through natural farming in Andhra Pradesh that within a matter of a couple of years, intensive green cover cropping and natural farming practices can help enormously to get back to 3% again in the space of 3 years or so. Animals, again, are very important in this. This is a more advanced or more recent advance. Not only do we grow plants, but the minute that we've grown plants, we've harvested the seeds or whatever we need from them, we can feed that stubble, we can feed that rest of that biomass to animals in the field. And again, the animals are converting that into biofertilizer and humates and stable soil carbon and helping to build ever more productive land. So yes, organic gardening, gardens, we can do that in a matter of weeks. On smaller field lots, we can do it in a matter of a couple of years, 2-3 years, but every step in that process helps. But the bigger challenge comes when we come to wider landscapes. And that's where, in a sense, we need now this extension of natural farming and grazing ecologies and agroforestry and agroecologies across wider landscape systems. But again, it's possible. And as you're demonstrating, yes, introducing pre-monsoon dry seeding, introducing ecological pasture management, agroforest, pre-monsoon dry seeding, we're able to extend soil carbon development. Now, it may not be possible to get up to 3% within 2 or 3 years, but certainly with good practice, we should be getting close to that within 5 years. So all this is saying is that natural farming applied judiciously through grassroots initiatives are able to turn country around rapidly within that 5 years sort of period. And we have to do that. And the only thing that can do that is natural farming, because if we continue with industrial green revolution agriculture, instead of fixing up to 10 tons of carbon per hectare per annum, we still are losing, oxidizing 5 to 10 tons of carbon per hectare per annum, progressively degrading those soils, bringing it back to 0.3 or below. And the consequences of that is what you're seeing in Pakistan to your north. So, look, it's possible, it's practical, it's profitable, and the only limitation now is the extension of that awareness of natural farming, its viability, its economic profitability for the farmers, and then having you as mentors, as the Masterclass field agents, mentors, catalysts, able to go through and help farmers adopt natural farming practices and capture these benefits. So, look, nature restores soils relatively rapidly, okay, within, again, decades, and we can as well, but it's only natural farming that can do it. And the bottom line is not the 3% target alone, but that we're on that journey, that everything we're doing is enhancing microbial carbon fixation rather than the oxidation of that carbon back to CO2, and with that, the degradation of the landscape. So, look, let's leave that question. We may come into later again on some of the other issues. So, question 2.
Walter, one supplementary question.
Yes,
Vijay here.
please.
Yeah, I think there is this question of what the compost is doing when we are spreading it on the soil, compost or even crop residue mulch. It has a role in what is its role in contributing to soil organic matter. And through pre-monsoon dry sowing and also intercropping in the main crops through 365 days green cover, we are actually pushing 60% of biomass into the soil. So between the two, what is more important, and therefore what is that brings out the specialty of the pre-monsoon dry sowing 365
Yeah.
days green cover.
Yes.
The second question here is that I think we should not worry whether it is 0.2, 0.3 right now. By following the 365 days green cover, we get all the benefits that we require, and at the same time, as a bonus, we are adding to the soil organic matter.
Yes. Look, thank you very much. It's very important questions. And yeah, it makes the point. It's not the quantity of litter, because in a sense, we've had that through the West, the zero-till stubble mulching phenomena, where we've put lots of litter on the soil. But if we kill the soil microbial activity, microbes, by putting on biocides at the same time, then we end up with lots of litter that doesn't break down, isn't converting into stable soil carbon, and really is not building that soil organic matter. So we've had lots of examples in the West where we've had farming, grain growing systems where we've been practicing zero-till for 20 years, 30 years, with very little improvement in soil carbon. What you've said is absolutely right. What matters isn't the litter, but it's actually the 365 days root growth, and it's the amount of root growth, the root exudates, and then the activity of the microbes in the soil, turning those roots into humates, and the exudates through mycorrhizal fungi into glomalin. And it's these humates, it's these fungal processes of humate formation and glomalin formation, which are actually the stable soil carbon biochemicals that make soil carbon, right? So it's not just the biomass, it's actually the activity of those fungi and converting them into stable soil carbon. At the same concept is, again, the role of herbivores, because basically there you've got mobile compost heaps, effectively the rumens of these animals, the guts of these animals, and they're again turning what is otherwise dry litter into biofertilizer and humates through the microbes in their guts. So yes, it's that role of converting biomass into stable soil carbon that matters. And of course, your other point is extremely important. It's not the rate, it's not the speed, it's the longevity. So if we can keep that going for 365 days of the year, because we've got good soil moistures, we've got continual cover, green cover cropping, then we're doing that 365 days of the year, and contrast that with an industrial crop that might grow rapidly for 50 or 80 days, but then stagnate. Well, there's a difference between 50, 80 days growth and 365 days growth. It's a 400% difference. And that's, in a sense, the 400% that is generating the improved soil carbon. The point about pre-monsoon dry seeding goes further, isn't it? Because not only does that give us the 365-day green cover, but that's encouraging plants to establish from the organic matter that's naturally in the soil. What happens that microbes in the soil are breaking down some of that organic matter, and in doing so, regenerating water, metabolic water, reversing photosynthesis, which used water. Well, here's the reverse of photosynthesis, which creates metabolic water, enough water for those seedlings, those seeds to germinate, to get the pre-monsoon dry seeding green cover established. It's that metabolic water and then the fungi that's associated with those young seedlings able to absorb water from soil surfaces that are otherwise unavailable, way below the wilting point tension of soils, that enable then those pre-monsoon crops to establish and enable them to then infiltrate, retain, and efficiently use all the water that does fall once the monsoon comes. But it's again pre-monsoon dry seeding in enabling 365 days greening, rehydration of formerly arid areas, which is actually extremely important. And the hope is, if we can extend this globally, can we actually take vast areas of arid wasteland, land that was productive, but that we've converted into arid wasteland, and can we help turn some of that back into productive 365-day green pasture and biosystems? So yes, it's the microbial activity and all the lessons that we've had in module 4, looking at that ABC phenomena. It is, yes, maximizing that microbial life and health of the soil. And of course, you're doing that through the biostimulant, the cow dung, the organic extracts, to stimulate that microbial activity to get ever higher soil carbon levels.
Yeah. Thank you, Walter.
Pleasure.
The message to our team is that we need not worry what is the initial situation on ground, because the situation is very bad. It's only 0.3, 0.5, 0.7. But what Walter is saying is that regardless of the initial situation of the soil, by following 365 days green cover, we get the necessary dividends for the farmer in terms of multiple crops, and we are adding to the soil organic matter at a rapid pace. So,
Yeah.
Walter, what I would request is, once these 10 master classes are over, we would need a session on how we are the arithmetic and the mathematics of the soil carbon, and how can we assess what is the addition in the soil organic matter every year. So we'll have a dedicated
Yes.
team which is involved in this kind of exercise, because it's also, everybody is asking us, Niti Aayog, people from
Yes.
other states, how can you say that you're adding to soil organic matter? So we would request you to slot one session after this is over, exclusively.
Yes, I think there's very good, Vijay. There's so many very good questions, and they all actually will need, like, okay, here is a descriptor, a fact sheet following it.
Yeah.
And obviously even other master classes. I'll just make the point and reinforcing what you said. It's not whether you're starting at 0.3 or 0.2.
Correct.
In fact, if you're starting at 0.2 and you get to 0.4, you've got 100% increase. You've doubled your. So starting low, by every little bit that you do, you're getting an enormous multiplier effect. So it's not the numbers that matter. The fact is that you've improved it compared to what it was before. And then by improving it, you can go further. And it's really just extending that philosophy to say, yes, we can do this, and we can do this just through natural farming practices as demonstrated in Andhra Pradesh through the natural farming process, rather than relying on high expensive inputs. But definitely we'll need more follow through, and definitely not just how to measure it numbers, but actually how do we have assays to show the relative functionality of these soils because it has changed from 0.2 to 0.4 or 0.2 to 2, and just demonstrating how the functionality of that soil because of it. The hygrograph, in a sense, illustrates some of that graphically, but we can go way beyond that.
Walter, I would be inviting people from other states, from Niti Aayog, etc., for that meeting that I was planning, which
Yes.
will be on how natural farming, especially pre-monsoon dry sowing, 365 days green cover, can build the country's soil organic matter very rapidly.
Yeah.
So it goes beyond RYSS.
No, totally agree, because this is where we started with the masterclass. In fact, from a historical perspective, it was how do we actually accelerate pre-monsoon dry seeding? But then there was so much demand for going back into the basics of soil carbon that the masterclasses, in a sense, had this bigger framework. But yes, we will get into that. Okay. And the same applies to the next question that I had here in terms of bioprecipitation, you see, because again, we need to answer that question now because it was asked. But again, it needs a whole masterclass on its own in a way, because it gets some very powerful, practical, but critical issues. And again, it's just touching the surface in some very big issues. So, Diksha, is that a relevant time to ask that question? How do we optimize conditions for bioprecipitation?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Is there I think there is a separate masterclass on this. I think you're planned on 6th or 7th module, Walter?
Well, no, Vijay. Well, no, we hadn't specifically talked about climate directly because so it was mentioned in this hydrology aspect, that's saying, look, yes, we've got to restore the hydrology, and in restoring hydrology, we can actually influence the climate only through hydrology.
Right.
But look, I mean, if
you can answer this briefly, and then we can have separate set of master classes around water issue, around climate. Just it's soil organic matter. It's not a small matter, small thing, because
not a small matter, but also it invites a whole lot of the climate physicists and climatologists into this, who may be not so focused on just farming and yields.
That's right. Correct.
Right?
Yeah, I agree with you. So
there's a whole different audience. But look, the whole issue of bioprecipitation, it's so important, because, see, we've always assumed scientifically, last 400-500 years, that yes, here's our rainfall, and rainfall's a random event. I mean, there's different parts of the world that gets different amounts of rain because of topography, seasons, and what have you. But basically, rainfall is actually a physical phenomena, which it is, of course, but they haven't really looked at, well, how is it influenced by biology? How is it influenced by vegetation? We've accepted that plants need rain, but we haven't really asked the question, does rain need plants? Or what is the role of plants in generating rain? And of course, as we've talked about in this pre-monsoon dry seeding and natural farming, we are about regreening landscapes. And so the question logically comes, are we also, by regreening those landscapes, restoring rainfalls, enhancing rainfalls? And the answer is yes, we are, in a very important, significant way, beneficially. And of course, as we heard in the first case, plants transpire water. So most of the water in the air actually is got up there because of transpiration and evaporation from water. Now, obviously, evaporation from water surfaces including the oceans, of course, is very important because 71% of the planet is covered with oceans. But oceans are a two-dimensional surface, right? There's one surface of the ocean, whereas while there's only 29% of the land surface, where we have vegetation growing on that land, 365-day green vegetation, we may have a leaf area index. That's an area of leaf surface to surface area of land of 10 to 1. So while there is only 30% of the planet covered with land, if it's carrying 10 times the surface area of transpiring leaf surface, by definition, it is able to put lots more water into the atmosphere than even the oceans can. And that's in a sense a fact. And so you've got regions like, for example, the Amazon basin that is transpiring water every day through its vegetation back into the atmosphere, and in fact, generating 5 to 7 times the water through transpiration that it's getting as inflow from the Atlantic Ocean. So, okay, so the vegetation, the longevity of green, the productive functional green is actually driving a key part of the hydrological cycle. So that's the first thing to note. So biology definitely generates the water in the air. What also biology does is basically then generate what happens to that water in the air. That water in the air can either form two major types of droplets. If there's a lot of dust and particulate pollutants in the air, that water in the air will form very, very small haze microdroplets. And these haze microdroplets then stay suspended in the air because they're so small, they're slightly negatively charged, they repel each other, and so you have this suspended humid haze situation. And of course, that water doesn't readily fall out of the air. So you end up with very humid, hot areas. It's hot because those haze microdroplets absorb solar radiation while they're in the liquid phase. But once they turn into gas, then they're the dominant greenhouse gas, water vapor. So basically, these humid hazes are basically warming regions, but also aridifying regions, because while it's 90% humidity, it never forms rainfall. And that's in a sense what's happened now, where we've got in summer an Asian brown haze all the way from Cairo to Beijing, which is in a sense sitting over the landscape, often oppressively hot, oppressively humid, to the point that actually people are finding the heat stroke or the heat health risks are enormous, but basically in also decreasing the rainfall. Okay, so we've got a key part of the global warming story actually driven by these humid hazes. And we've intensified them because we've been degrading so much landscape. We've been putting some 5 billion tons of dust particles into the air every year, adding to the humid haze nucleation or the suspended humid haze particles. And that's a key part of the global warming climate crisis, heating and drying. And obviously the best thing we can do, and nature does, is to say, how do we get rid of those humid hazes from the air? And instead of having them in the air warming and drying, can we get them down as rain onto the ground to restore cooling hydrological processes? And nature does that through a sequence of what we call precipitation nuclei, highly hygroscopic precipitation nuclei that literally coalesce millions of these haze microdroplets initially into a cloud droplet. And then as that keeps on growing, coalesce the clouds droplets into a raindrop, which then restores the rainfall, which then restores the hydrological cycle. But, excuse me, but in basically coalescing these haze droplets, basically these precipitation nuclei initially form clouds. And of course, clouds then have the exact opposite effect to the hazes, because the clouds will actually reflect solar radiation back out to space, significantly cooling the planet. So by turning warming, humid haze, microdrop hazes into clouds, we can turn what had been formerly heating the planet into a cooling process, because now the clouds are reflecting incident solar radiation back to space. And in fact, some 30% of the incident solar radiation naturally reflects back into space, cooling the planet. If we go further and have these precipitation nuclei turning cloud droplets into rain droplets, then of course they are restoring the hydrological cycle. They're cooling the Earth's surface, they're rehydrating the surface, allowing transpiration and its cooling effect to again operate, further cooling the landscape. Okay, transpiration in itself is cooling some, or returning some 24% of the incident solar radiation back out to space. So just between clouds and this rainfall, there's some 60% of radiation that's going back out to space, cooling the planet. So these precipitation nuclei become extremely important in regulating the Earth's hydrological cycle, rainfall, and climate. So the question is, well, what are these precipitation nuclei? What have we done to them? And can we manage and enhance them? And what role does biology play in that? Well, the physics is very clear. We've established it fully. There's three types of precipitation nuclei in nature. There's ice crystals, which again are hygroscopic, and they're very important in high altitudes, near the poles, and high latitudes near the poles, and high altitudes up higher on mountains and in the upper air. But in tropical regions or basic inland regions, obviously they're not always so dominant. There's another form of precipitation nuclei which dominate over the world's ocean. And of course, these are salts, sodium chloride that comes up in sea spray. And sodium chloride, again, is highly hygroscopic, and it will form then condensation nuclei, which then turn into clouds and then into rain. And much of the marine air is then nucleated by these salt spray nuclei. But by far the most important precipitation nuclei are actually bacteria. Bacteria generated by vegetation, bacteria released from the stomatal cavity of trees. And basically these bacteria are going up into the atmosphere as part of the transpiration stream. And in fact, once up in the air, are nucleating and recoalescing that moisture back into raindrops. And so this is really nature operating at perfection, so that rainfall is actually, over half the world's rainfall, a symbiotic microbial process, nucleated through these precipitation nuclei, these bacteria generated from forests. And there's lots of more work that we need to do on studying the detail here, but certainly we have a lot of knowledge about how significant they are. Over half the rainfall, for example, in the Amazon basin and in tropical inland areas is driven by these bacterial precipitation nuclei from forests. And so it follows that by regreening vegetation, by pre-monsoon dry seeding, by natural farming, by agroforestry, agroecologies, we can actually enhance this microbial precipitation. And there's lots of case studies where we can demonstrate how important it is. Interestingly, it's not any vegetation, not all vegetation types are doing this. There's lots more that we need to know what types of vegetation, what age, species, etc., are optimum in doing that. But the point is that it's, yes, plants are generating rainfall through these precipitation nuclei, these microbial nuclei. Now, the question then was asked, what is the risk that there's some of these bacteria like Pseudomonas, maybe plant pathogens? And the answer is, well, yes, they are sometimes pathogenic, but only on very stressed plants. And in nature, obviously, if they were pathogenic, they would have wiped out vegetation on this planet, which they obviously haven't done. So I don't think there's any danger of these bacteria. They're a natural function, a critical natural function in rainfall. And in a sense, we can help to restore that as part of our regreening, rehydration. Certainly the Pseudomonas bacteria, I mean, there's lots of interesting stories about them. They've certainly been identified, but in fact, they're only a very small component of the total bacterial precipitation nuclei story and pool. But look, that's getting into details which perhaps we shouldn't get into now because, oh yes, I've got to check. We're running out of time. So next question, please.
Next question is a field question. How to convince the concept of carbon sponge to the farmers growing ID crops by showing practically how soil withholds moisture. It is difficult to convince completely to the farmer who are growing paddy because soil is always flooded in this region. Is there any field method to show this to the farmer?
Thank you. And thank you, because last Q&A, I couldn't quite understand what the question was about. So this is actually excellent. So let's come back into that. Look, there's no question that, every gram of extra carbon we're putting in the soil can hold water, up to 8 grams within its own molecular structure, but even more than that if it's creating soil matrices, open porous thing. And it's a bit like what you can see, a weight of tissue paper, right? Like if you have a 1 gram of tissue paper, you saturate it and you weigh it and it can hold, 8 grams or something like that in water. So that's pretty simple. Now you can see it's very important in sandy soils or loose soils, arid soils. Yes, the sponge is holding water. But the question is valid that where we've got paddy, where we've got saturated soils, water isn't limiting. So what's the benefit of organic matter? And that's valid while the soil is saturated. But of course, paddy soils aren't saturated 365 days of the year, are they? Basically, they're saturated while we're growing the rice crop initially, but then the organic matter in those paddy soils is particularly important in maintaining their physical structure. Because if we didn't have that organic matter there, those paddy soils will collapse to more or less concreted, collapsed surfaces. And so then the bulk density, the aeration, and the root proliferation through those soils would decrease rapidly to the point that they'd lose productivity. So the organic matter in paddy soils is important in maintaining that open, rootable soil physical structure so that even paddy roots, even under hydrated conditions, can grow down to 1 meter or more rather than just be on a surface compacted film. So the depth of rooting is very, very important. And in a sense, the organic matter is maintaining that. The organic matter is also very important in creating in paddy soils surfaces for microbial activity, for example, of blue-green algae. Okay, so it's the organic matter surfaces in paddy soils that allow blue-green algae, which require slightly anaerobic conditions or lower oxygen conditions, but these organic surfaces are very important in allowing these blue-green algae, for example, to grow. And of course, these blue-green algae is what is fixing the nitrogen in paddy soils that makes the paddy soils productive. So whereas the hydrological role of organic matter in paddy soil while it is flooded isn't obviously of prime significance, its nutritional value in creating both rootability, the depth of soil volume accessible is important, but as well as creating the surface area and the habitat for blue-green algae and nitrogen fixation and nitrogen availability in the paddy soil. So again, soils are beautifully complex and there's many benefits to them. And as we're seeing in the paddy soil, yes, it's hydrology for some of the time. It's also nutrition. It's also rootability. It's fair comment to say if the paddy soil was anaerobic, fully saturated all the time, then basically it would become quite stagnant and dead because there still needs to be some oxygen coming into that soil for some of the time to maintain its productivity, its viability. So, yeah, a valid question. Different roles of organic sponge, organic matter in paddy soils while it's wet compared to when it's drier. But even when it's wet, it's performing a critical role in root proliferation and nitrogen fixation. That follows on, of course, with a sandy soil, yes, basically sandy soils, they of course benefit enormously from the sponge, but they also, in terms of their hydrology, but we'll talk about that in the next module a bit, but they're also very important in creating the organic surface areas, the negative charge site for the cation exchange capacity, and therefore the biofertility of those soils, even in sandy soils, as they are in paddy soils. So it's not just water, it's also nutrition that becomes critically important. Okay, any other, next questions, please?
Thank you, Walter. Due to time constraint, this would be the last question.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Is there a peril or a probability that soil one day can be overhydrated practicing rehydration processes? If so ever, what could be the aftermath and repercussions and way out of it?
Okay, well, look, this is a very important question in the context of Pakistan at the moment, isn't it? Because obviously they think that we're super hydrated, everything is flooding. But no, look, soils can't be overhydrated for the simple reason that by creating the sponge through natural farming, as we're talking about, the soil will infiltrate, retain, and make available the water it can hold, but the water excessive of that will then go and recharge aquifers below the rootable soil surface. So, it will recharge those deeper geological aquifers, or it will run out as springs on slopes, right? So that basically you'll get subsoil moisture running out as springs and into streams, and then, of course, feeding the rivers slowly. And so basically the sponge is just retaining extra water in the soil according to its capacity, but then letting the rest of it drain out. Now, obviously, where we have no drainage capacity, yes, then we end up with a wetland, then we'll create a wetland. And obviously you could say that wetland is then overhydrated, but wetlands in themselves are, of course, very productive biosystems, right? Whether it's for, basically nitrogen fixing, organic matter fixation, fish growth, or whatever. But generally speaking, in a farming situation, no, you can't overhydrate soils. There is no risk because the water, excess water, will drain either downwards into aquifers or sideways into springs and feeding stream subsoil. And all basically the sponge is doing is then maximizing water retention to maximize the longevity of green growth. It's the converse of basically collapsing the soil structure. If we degrade the soil, green revolution, industrial agriculture, we destroyed that soil structure. It's then that we end up with the massive rapid runoff, as we've seen in the hygrographs. And of course, it's those hygrograph runoffs that give us the floods, the erosion, which is, of course, what kills people and destroys biosystems and the future of societies. And of course, it's also those flood runoffs, which, paradoxically, then create the droughts, because all the water that should and could have been in the soil to maintain longevity of green growth 365 days of the year has been lost. And so now these areas which were formerly hydrated, then they become desert, arid wastelands and desert, because the water that had been there has been lost. And so in dry seasons, all these soils and vegetation systems just collapse. So basically, as a general rule, no, soils can't be overhydrated. They can form wetlands, but even wetlands in those basin situations are productive biosystems. And in most situations, there's either drainage into deeper aquifers or sideways into springs and streams. So yeah, no need to worry about that. Okay, well, look, thank you very much. They've been, again, excellent questions. I think as Vijay mentioned, yes, there is a need now to look at some of these topics, soil carbon measurement and analysis, bioprecipitation, where we may need to have much, much deeper options for discussion. They're critically important. But I think that's been the value of this Q&A interaction, because your questions, I'm constantly really impressed. They're full credit to you. They're very deep, good questions. So let's look at now next module. Ben, I think, has sent that through on biofertility. And again, it's making the point, how does regenerating the Earth's soil carbon sponge not just give us hydrology, but gives us actually biofertility without needing to add nutrients as fertilizer. So thank you very much, and all the very best. And we'll look forward to next Monday again, as before. And it's getting very, very exciting, and we're getting really deeply into it. So let's keep on working at it and enjoying it. Okay, thank you very much. All the best.
Walter, thank you so
Yes.
much. What I had meant was, we will plan a general session on restoring soil carbon, not for RYSS, but it will be a much bigger group from across the country, so that the momentum in favor of natural farming in the country is kept up. So it will
Yes.
be senior people from across different states.
Good.
And from Niti Aayog, etc.
Yeah.
So this is
No, look, on all these
will be-
topics, any
yeah.
topic, yeah. Yes.
Yes, Walter, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Look, on any of these topics, yes, very happy. Let's sit down, and then we can sit down and design and plan, but also target it specifically to that senior audience, right?
Yes. So that is number one. Number two is, at the end of the 10th week, I would like to have a discussion with you, your team, our team, as to which are those subjects we need to go deeper, And
Yes.
how do we structure those sessions based on your time and convenience? That is number one. Number two, also one more thing which you may keep in mind is, can we look at a landscape following your advice from day one? So,
Yes.
so about
Yeah.
2,000 hectares or 5,000 hectares
Yeah.
landscape. There is an opportunity because there is the Global Environment Facility, which is looking at 8 landscapes. So that will be one thing if we can have a session with those who are working on that, and if we can have a work plan on your visit also to India.
Yeah. Well, look, yes, I agree. I think that's very important. Then because we want to, I mean, here is in a sense revisiting the science, the knowledge, the education, but then this is the practical application. But also Dr. Reddy's proposal, how do we now apply this sponge, natural farming, and saying, okay, how do we rehydrate or secure the water requirements of villages at a village level by what level of watershed natural farming regeneration is needed. So if we've got 10,000 people dependent on a watershed, okay, what do we need to do at that watershed to secure their essential water needs?
So that would be a, where that of course require a visit by you and then helping us in the planning part and also mentoring us while we implement that. So this will be, something we'll require you to plan a visit. So I don't know when that is possible.
Yeah, well, look, let's have all those discussions, but certainly the forward planning, what arises from this masterclass, and then what are the follow up, and then what's needed in terms of visits and practical. Yes, sure. I agree. We need that discussion.
Okay. And my request to my team is that, to the extent possible, if the questions are related to what is troubling you in the field, of course, I can't strictly make a distinction, can have all kinds of questions, but it will be what is troubling you at the field level. And the way Walter is explaining different concepts to you, how is that answering some questions? That also can be as a comment, after these 5 sessions or after each session, how did it help you to take these lessons to the farmers? And what is troubling you? What is it that farmers are asking where you don't have an answer? So if we can use these sessions to help you clarify your own field level doubts, field level questions from the farmers. Of course, I'm not saying that you should not ask questions like climate change and all that, but please focus on field questions. Maybe some balance, Dharmender, in the curating of questions, that we can also ask all our participants that till now, or maybe we can do it later, but then definitely when you're having the pre-work session for the next week, if we can focus on the field level questions, that may be a very useful way for everybody to get clarification when they are taking these lessons to the master trainers. Over to you, Dharmender.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Walter.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an excellent session for all of us. Actually, the questions are coming from each of the groups. There are 6 groups that are formed, and they've been discussing what their learning has been and all of that. So, and we are asking each group to give a question. So, so as a group, they have formulated that question, and that is coming up to you. So So
look, I think at the end we'll have, the 10 modules will have had all the different questions, and I think we'll get that balance of both here the scientific, but also here those practical questions. And then in a sense, we can condense and document, look, here is a
Correct.
concise answer to each of them at different levels, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
that we end up with a bit of a toolkit for you to use in the field or scientifically, you know, like, yeah, these are the key questions, here are the key components of the answer. So everybody has got, in a sense, empowered through and to answer them.
Yeah, Walter, today
Yes.
actually happens to be a Teacher's Day in India.
Right.
So we bow in respect to our master teacher, you know, for enlightening us. So,
No, we are
best wishes to
all
you
on this
from
journey
all of.
together. We're on this journey together, and it's just obviously always a matter of just trying to keep it condensed, you see, because like the bioprecipitation, and it's such a important but also deep field, and we can only touch the surface of them, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Dharmender.
Okay,
Thank you, Walter.
And we are making a list of unanswered questions also. So
Yes, good.
if we have additional time, we can take them at the end of the sessions. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you.
Okay, all the best. We'll see you then next week.
Bye.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah. Thank you. Diksha, can you put up the slide, please? See, we
Yes,
are
sir.
tracking the assignment submission of all the participants, and it's not encouraging. If you see, you can see the graph, right? All of you participants. We know the names behind these numbers. So what do we do about this? So see, attendance, assignments, we are tracking, and even each of your assignments are being evaluated. So unless we see satisfactory contribution from your end, we'll not be able to certify you that you have, you know, successfully completed all
Dharmendra,
these. Yes, sir.
we can list out names and also give an opportunity for them to explain on the failure or whatever it is.
Yes, sir.
And listing their names itself will have a huge improvement in their performance.
Yes, sir. We are planning to do that, sir. So module wise, person wise, will no, these could not attend the session, could not submit the session, or did not get enough marks in the assignment. All of that we are trying to put. So 50% of the sessions are over, and if we see the trend declining, I think there is something serious we should add. So we'll give out a report, sir, with all the details of the participants. We'll share it in the group. And see, all of you, please listen. When you are constrained by some other work, and when you are requesting some additional time, for say Sunday night, please allow me to submit my assignment. We are doing that, but simply keeping quiet is not healthy. Okay.
By
So
any
it's
chance,
not making any effort only to submit assignment. That is what.
yeah,
Yes.
by any chance, if the live session is cannot be attended by any exigencies, they should go through the recorded version.
Yes, sir. They should be catching up with the recorded version.
And also catch up with the assignment dates. If not, ask for extra time. As Dharmender says, keeping quiet doesn't help anybody. End of the day, we are enlightened. We are learning new things at the cost of